She sent the voice message at 5:47 p.m., and by 5:49, her entire career was over. Amara Brooks had worked for Jang Tae-hyun for 14 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. She knew this because she had started counting sometime around month 2, when she realized that surviving each day in his orbit was its own kind of achievement. But nothing, not the spilled coffee on his Italian desk, not the time she accidentally forwarded a confidential acquisition memo to the wrong floor, not even the incident with the shredder and the quarterly projections that she still could not fully explain. Nothing had prepared her for what happened at 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. She had meant to send it to her sister. That was the thing that kept replaying in her head as the notification light on her phone blinked red, red, red. A voice message, 43 seconds, sent to the JTH executive group chat, 47 recipients, including the man himself. If you've ever said something you couldn't take back, something that came out of exhaustion and frustration and a little too much honesty, drop your city in the comments below. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because the story you're about to hear is only getting started. Like this video so more people find us, and stay with me until the very end, because what happens next inside that penthouse will change everything you think you know about power, control, and the kind of person who can bring an empire to its knees without even trying. The morning Amara Brooks almost destroyed her own life started the same way every morning started, with a dead phone and a broken umbrella and a train that left exactly 45 seconds before she reached the platform. She stood on the empty platform, rain hammering the roof of Mapo Station, and took a breath so deep it hurt. Her blazer was soaked through at the shoulders, the folder tucked under her arm, the one containing the revised Shindaewoo preliminary terms that Tae-hyun had demanded on his desk by 8 a.m., had developed a soft, papery wilt at the corner. She pressed it tighter against her side, as if pressure alone could reverse water damage. She had been awake since 4:30, not because she chose to be, because Tae-hyun's assistant before her had left behind a chaotic archive system that made absolutely no logical sense, and Amara had spent the better part of 3 weeks quietly rebuilding it from scratch, off the clock, during the hours when nobody was watching, because she didn't know how to let a broken thing stay broken if she had the ability to fix it. It was a personality flaw, she knew that. Her mother had told her so more than once. The next train came in 11 minutes. She stood there, folder against her ribs, water running off the hem of her skirt, and counted the ceiling tiles because it was something to do. She arrived at JTH Capital at 7:58 a.m., 2 minutes ahead of deadline. The lobby guard, a man named Yoon, who was the only person in the entire building who had ever bothered to learn her name, gave her a small nod as she came through the glass doors trailing a wet streak across the marble floor. She nodded back. That was the full extent of her social life in this building, and she had made her peace with it. The 31st floor was already humming. That was the thing about working for Jang Tae-hyun. His people moved like they were afraid of stillness, like pausing for 5 seconds would somehow register on a monitor somewhere and be held against them. Amara had noticed early on that none of the senior staff ate lunch at their desks. Not because they left the building, but because eating required a level of relaxation that nobody on 31 seemed capable of sustaining. They ate standing at the windows, or walking between conference rooms, or in the elevator between floors if they thought nobody was watching. She dropped the folder on her desk, pulled up the morning brief, and found 3 new items tagged urgent that had been added after midnight. She did not sigh. She had trained herself out of audible sighing somewhere around month 4. Tae-hyun arrived at 8:11. She knew this not because she saw him, but because the temperature on the floor dropped by approximately 4 degrees the moment he stepped out of the elevator. That was not a metaphor. People literally moved differently. Posture changed, voices dropped, keyboards typed faster. He had that effect on a room the way a cold front had an effect on weather systems. You felt it before you saw it. She didn't look up from her screen. Brooks? His voice was exactly what you'd expect from a man who had spent years being obeyed. Not loud, not aggressive, just absolutely certain that whoever he was speaking to would respond. It was the voice of someone who had never once had to repeat himself and fully expected that streak to continue. The Shindaewoo terms. He wasn't asking. "On your desk," she said, still not looking up. "Revised per your markups from Sunday." I also flagged 3 clauses in Section 9 that I think are going to be a problem in diligence. I left a separate note. A pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. In Taehyun's world, that was the equivalent of a long, thoughtful silence. "I didn't ask for your analysis." "I know," she said. "It's in a separate note. You can throw it away." Another pause. Then footsteps, moving away. She finally looked up and watched his back disappear through the double doors of his office. In 14 months, she had never once been able to read whether moments like that were going to end badly or not. It was like trying to predict weather with no instruments, no data, just the feeling in your knees. The note stayed on his desk. She knew because he didn't throw it away where she could hear it. That was, by the standards of working for Jang Tae-hyun, a good morning. The next 7 hours were not a good morning. They were not a good anything. By 3 p.m., she had handled 4 separate contract revisions, coordinated logistics for a meeting with the Busan team that kept shifting in time like it was trying to escape her calendar, fielded 11 calls that should have gone to other departments, but somehow always ended up at her desk, and consumed a total of 1 protein bar and half a cup of cold coffee that she kept forgetting she'd poured. At 4:15, Director Kwon from the Strategy Division stopped by her desk with the particular expression of someone who had bad news and had decided, for reasons of personal survival, to give it to her instead of to Tae-hyun directly. "The Shin Dae-woo contact is requesting a preliminary in-person," Kwon said, "Thursday, in Busan." Amara looked at the calendar on her screen. "He has the board call Thursday morning and the Mirai introduction Thursday afternoon." "I know. So one of those moves. That's the decision." "Whose decision?" Kwon's expression shifted into something that was technically a smile. "He'd like your recommendation." She stared at him. "He'd like my recommendation. You have a read on Shin Dae-woo that the rest of us apparently don't." She thought about the note she'd left about Section 9. She thought about the fact that it apparently hadn't been thrown away. "Move the Mirai introduction," she said. "Busan on Thursday, Mirai the following Tuesday. Shin Dae-woo is further along and has more leverage right now. You lose momentum with them. It costs more to rebuild it than a 1-week delay costs with Mirai." Kwon wrote nothing down. She had a feeling he already had her answer and had just needed her to say it out loud. After he left, she sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk and felt the specific exhaustion of a person who is doing 2 people's jobs and being paid for neither of them adequately. This was around the point where, if she was honest with herself, the voice message thing started becoming inevitable. By 5:30, the floor was mostly empty. The Busan logistics were confirmed. The board call had been moved to a morning slot that was going to make 3 people in Tokyo very unhappy. Her inbox had reached a number she'd stopped looking at around noon. She picked up her phone to text her sister. Dara was the only person she talked to with full honesty. The version of honesty that didn't get filtered through professionalism or self-preservation. The version where she said the actual thing. She hit the microphone. "Okay, so I just need to say this out loud to someone who isn't going to report it to HR. Her voice was low, more tired than she'd realized. "I have been awake since 4:30 a.m. I have reorganized a contract, rescheduled a board call, and apparently become some kind of unofficial strategy consultant for a company that still lists me as a level 3 administrative assistant. And the man at the center of all of this, the reason I cannot sleep, the reason I am still at this desk at 5:30 on a Tuesday, is the most arrogant man in Korea." A short pause. The kind you take when you're deciding whether to keep going. She kept going. "And I know that. I do. I know exactly what he is. I just also, and I need you to never repeat this, he is also ridiculously handsome, which makes the arrogance somehow worse, because at least if he was unpleasant to look at, I could maintain my irritation without any additional complications." Another pause. "Okay, I need to eat something. Call me when you can." She hit send. She set the phone down. She looked at the screen in front of her and finished adding a footnote to the Busan logistics document. It was 43 seconds before her phone lit up. Not from Dara. From a number she did not immediately recognize. She picked it up. It was a notification. Group message. JTH Executive Group. Her voice message. She sat completely still for what felt like a very long time, but was probably closer to 4 seconds. Then she looked at her phone again, as if looking at it a second time might produce a different result. It did not. The message had been delivered to 47 people, including Jang Tae-hyun. The first response came in 11 seconds. From Senior Counsel Park, a single punctuation mark, a period, which, in Korean office culture, communicated a volume of things that Amara did not have the bandwidth to fully process. The second response came from someone she didn't know in risk management, a screenshot of the audio waveform, as if documenting evidence. The third was silence from every name she did recognize, which was somehow louder than everything else. Amara set her phone face down on the desk. Then she picked it up again, turned it back over, and read the thread with the focused detachment of someone reviewing a crime scene they themselves had created. 47 recipients, 43 seconds. The most arrogant man in Korea. Ridiculously handsome. She put the phone in her desk drawer, closed the drawer, then she opened it again, because putting the phone in the drawer did not delete the audio file from the server, and she knew this with the full clarity of someone who had spent 3 weeks rebuilding their boss's archive system. She was still sitting there, drawer half open, phone staring up at her, when the intercom on her desk clicked on. "Brooks?" His voice was exactly the same as it was every morning. Same tone, same certainty, same complete absence of inflection that gave her no information whatsoever about what was happening on the other side of that wall. "Yes," she said. Her own voice came out steadier than she expected. "My office, now." The intercom clicked off. The floor was quiet. The few remaining staff on 31 had gone very still in the specific way that people go still when they have witnessed something catastrophic and don't want to be noticed near it. One junior coordinator near the east windows was staring at her screen with the intensity of someone who had decided that whatever was happening, she had not been there for it. Amara stood up. She straightened her blazer, which was still damp at the shoulders. She walked across the floor to the double doors, pushed them open, and stepped inside. Taehyun was standing at the window, not sitting, which was unusual. He stood with his back to her, hands loose at his sides, looking out at the Han River below, where the city was just beginning to light up against the early dark of November. He didn't turn around immediately. She stood in the middle of the room and did not apologize. Not because she didn't feel the impulse, she felt it completely, felt it in her sternum like a fist, but because she had decided somewhere between her desk and this door that walking in already shrinking would make everything worse. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. He turned around. His face was, she searched for the right word, neutral. Not angry, not amused, not embarrassed, just neutral, in the specific way of someone who has spent years making sure that their face never told anyone anything they hadn't decided to share. He looked at her for a long moment. "You sent an audio message to the executive group." "Yes." "In which you called me arrogant." "Yes." "And ridiculously handsome." The silence that followed was approximately 1,000 years long. "Yes," she said. He walked to his desk. Not quickly, not slowly. He sat down, opened the folder on top. The Shindaewoo folder, she noticed, her revised version with her note tucked inside the front cover, and looked at it briefly before looking back at her. "Sit down, Brooks." She sat. He was quiet for another moment. His hands were flat on the desk, same as hers had been an hour ago. She wondered if he'd been doing this long enough that stillness had become a tactic, if he'd taught himself to be motionless in the way that she'd taught herself not to sigh. "Thursday," he said. "Busan. You're coming." She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The Shindaewoo meeting. You flagged Section 9. I want you there." She stared at him. "I also have a situation that requires additional support over the next 7 days," he continued in the same voice he used to discuss quarterly projections. "My current household coordinator has had to leave unexpectedly. You will stay at my residence for the duration of the week and provide operational support for the business activities I have ongoing." She kept staring. "Your things can be sent for tomorrow morning," he said. "Tonight you'll use the guest room." "Tonight," she repeated. "There's a briefing at 9 a.m. tomorrow on the full scope. I expect you to review the MIRE terms before then." He looked down at the folder. "That's all." She didn't move for a second. Then she said, I called you arrogant in a group message to 47 people. You also identified a clause error in Section 9 that my legal team missed. He still didn't look up. The arrogance point is noted. The Section 9 point is more useful to me right now. She stood. Brooks? She stopped. The message you sent. He finally looked at her, and she still could not read his face, couldn't find a single thing in it that told her what was happening underneath. Delete it from your mind, starting now. She nodded once, walked to the door. As her hand hit the handle, she heard him say very quietly, almost like he hadn't intended to say it at all. The Section 9 note was correct, by the way. She walked out of his office and didn't let herself exhale until she was back at her desk, in her chair, with her hands flat on the keyboard. All around her, she was aware of the careful non-looking of people who had heard everything and would say nothing. She reached into her drawer, picked up her phone, opened the group message thread. 47 recipients. 43 seconds. Still there, still undeniable, still hers. She put the phone back in the drawer. She had to pack. The guest room in Jang Tae-hyun's penthouse was larger than Amara's entire apartment. She stood in the doorway for a moment with her overnight bag hanging from one hand and took in the kind of room that existed in magazines and nowhere else. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Han River, a bed that looked like it had never been slept in, furniture that was the color of charcoal and bone, and nothing else. No clutter, no personality, not a single thing on any surface that suggested a human being had ever made a choice here based on something as impractical as preference. It was 11:40 p.m. She had gone home, packed badly, argued with herself in the elevator about whether this was real, and come back. The building concierge had been expecting her. Nobody had looked surprised. That was somehow the strangest part. She sat on the edge of the bed, carefully, like she was afraid of leaving a mark, and looked at the river. She had called Dara from the cab. The conversation had lasted 4 minutes and consisted primarily of Dara making sounds that weren't quite words, while Amara described what had happened, in order, without embellishment, because no embellishment was necessary. He's keeping you, Dara had finally said. He's utilizing my skill set during a period of operational need, Amara said. He's keeping you, Dara said again, with the certainty of someone who had known Amara for 31 years and had therefore stopped accepting her reframings at face value. Amara had not responded to that. Now she sat in the dark with the river lights below her and thought about Section 9, and told herself that was the whole explanation, and almost believed it. At 5:50 a.m., before any alarm she'd set, she heard movement. Not loud, just the particular quality of sound that a space makes when someone who belongs to it is moving through it, the soft percussion of a specific routine, footsteps that knew where they were going without needing light. She lay still and listened to the rhythm of it, and felt, with some clarity, that she was inside someone else's life and had not yet figured out the rules. She was at the kitchen counter with coffee by 6:15. He appeared at 6:22, and she knew it was him before she turned around because the temperature shifted again. That specific change in the air that she'd spent 14 months cataloging without meaning to. He was wearing a gray shirt. Not a suit. Just a gray shirt and dark trousers and no tie, and it was the first time she had ever seen him without the full armor of the executive presentation, and she kept her eyes on her coffee cup. He looked at her, then at the second cup she'd set on the counter. You made coffee, he said. There's a machine, she said. He picked up the cup, drank. Neither of them said anything for approximately 40 seconds. Outside, Seoul was beginning its early noise, distant traffic, a siren somewhere far below, the city waking up in pieces. The briefing is at 9, he said. I know. You reviewed the Mirai terms. It wasn't a question. Last night. Until 2 a.m. She finally looked at him. There's an indemnification structure in Clause 14 that's going to be a problem. Whoever drafted it was protecting the client and didn't account for the way you've structured the holding entity. Miri could walk away from liability on 3 different scenarios and leave JTH exposed. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. I'll have it written up before 9, she said. He set the cup down. You should sleep more. You should tell me things with less than 12 hours' notice. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't a smile. It was something in the vicinity of a smile. A geographical neighbor. Then it was gone. 9 a.m., he said, and walked out of the kitchen. She stared at the space where he'd been. She thought, this is going to be complicated. She thought, I already know that. The 9 a.m. briefing was not in a conference room. It was in a room on the northeast side of the penthouse that she hadn't seen the night before. Windowless, climate-controlled, with a table that seated 8 and walls lined with locked cabinets, and 2 screens she recognized as the kind that weren't connected to anything external. A room designed to keep things in. There were 4 men already seated when she arrived. She recognized 2 from the executive floor. Senior Counsel Park, who had responded to her audio message with a single period, and a logistics director whose name she always blanked on. The other 2 she didn't know. They were not the type of men whose names appeared on org charts, she thought. They had the posture of people who spent time in rooms like this one. Han Min-seok was already seated at Tae-hyun's right. She had interacted with him maybe a dozen times in 14 months. He was 61, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, in the specific way of someone who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He had the practiced warmth of a diplomat. Always the right question, always the right amount of eye contact, never anything you could point to as wrong. The executive staff treated him with a deference that was different from how they treated Tae-hyun. With Tae-hyun, the deference was fear. With Min-seok, it was something closer to affection. He looked at her when she came in and smiled. Miss Brooks. His English was precise, accented at the edges. The Section 9 analyst. That's not my title, she said pleasantly, and sat down at the far end of the table. Tae-hyun came in 30 seconds later. The room recalibrated the way it always did. She watched it happen, and watched Min-seok watch it happen, and noticed something she filed away without knowing why. The older man's expression when Tae-hyun entered was warm and steady, in the practiced way that things are warm and steady when they have been practiced a long time. The briefing lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. The broad structure was explained to her in layers, the first layer being what she was allowed to know, which was about the merger framework, the Shindaewoo approach, the 7-day timeline before the main meeting. The second layer was implied rather than stated. The organization she was working inside was not only what it presented itself to be on any official document. She had understood this for some time, with the peripheral understanding of someone who has learned not to look directly at certain things. She asked questions when she had them, practical ones. Logistics, communication chains, what she was responsible for, and what was outside her scope. Min-seok answered several of them before Tae-hyun could, always smoothly, always with that precise warmth. Twice, she noticed Tae-hyun look at her after Min-seok answered. A brief glance, information gathering, filed and gone. After the others left, she was gathering her notes when Min-seok stopped beside her. You're brave, he said quietly. The warmth was still in his voice, but the volume had dropped. Coming here, after yesterday. She looked up. We're just employed. He smiled again. It reached his eyes perfectly. Tae-hyun doesn't bring people into his home. You should know that. I'm here in an operational capacity. Yes, Min-seok said. Of course. He picked up his folder. Do be careful, Ms. Brooks. This environment is demanding, even for people who were built for it. He left. She sat with her notes and thought about the word careful and the way he'd said it and the thing underneath it that she couldn't quite name. The first 3 days had a shape that she learned by the end of day 1. Tae-hyun ran the penthouse the same way he ran the office, on a system that was internally logical and entirely unforgiving of deviation. Meals at specific times, calls in specific windows, documents in specific order in specific locations. The household staff, 2 people who moved through the space with practiced invisibility, knew this system completely and maintained it without being asked. Amara walked into it like someone walking into a structure they hadn't been given the blueprints for. Day 1, she reorganized the physical document system in the study because the existing structure, filing by date received, meant that related documents were spread across 3 different folders, and cross-referencing them required unnecessary time. She did this between 9 and 11 in the morning while Tae-hyun was on a call, using a logic that made complete sense to her. At 11:15, he came into the study, went to the third cabinet, opened the second drawer, and stopped. She looked up from her screen. He looked at the drawer, then at her. "I moved the acquisition files," she said. "I organized by counterparty instead of date. Everything related to Shin Dae-woo is in one place now. Same with Mirai, same with the 3 secondary. I know where everything is," he said. His voice was level. "I designed this system. Your system requires you to check 3 drawers to pull together a complete picture of any single deal." "My system requires me to check 3 drawers," he said, "because I always do. And because the act of checking 3 drawers means I review everything adjacent to what I'm looking for and don't miss things." She sat with that for a moment. "That's actually not a terrible reason," she said. "Put it back." She put it back. All of it, by end of day, drawer by drawer, exactly as it had been. He came in at 6 p.m., opened the second drawer, checked the third, and didn't say anything. She considered that a draw. Day 2, she spilled coffee. Not on the antique side table. She'd been careful about that since she'd noticed it was the kind of thing that had a story attached to it, the kind of object that sits in a specific place in a specific way that tells you someone made a conscious choice about it. She spilled it on herself, down the front of her blazer, while trying to handle a phone call and a document transfer simultaneously, and the sound she made was involuntary and loud. The household coordinator, a quiet woman named Seo, who communicated primarily in small gestures, appeared with a cloth before the coffee had finished dripping. What Amara hadn't anticipated was that Tae-hyun was directly behind her, coming from the corridor. He stopped. She turned around with the cloth pressed to her blazer and the phone still at her ear and the document halfway off the edge of the table, and they looked at each other. "I've got it," she said to the phone. Then, to him, "I've got it." "You have coffee on your collar," he said. "I'm aware." He reached out. She went still. He straightened the document on the table that was about to slide off the edge, pushed it back flat with 2 fingers, and then turned and walked away. She stood there with the cloth and the phone and thought about the particular geography of that moment, what it had and hadn't contained. It was during the afternoon of day 2 that she first noticed the anomaly. She wasn't looking for it. She was cross-referencing the Shin Dae-woo background materials with the secondary financial summaries that Min-suk's team had submitted. Routine work, the kind that required attention but not inspiration. When she hit a number that didn't reconcile. Small. Genuinely small. A rounding difference in a quarterly aggregate that could have been formatting, could have been a conversion issue, could have been nothing. She flagged it in her notes and kept moving. She found the second instance 20 minutes later. Same scale, different report, different quarter. She closed the file and opened another one and told herself it was coincidence. Day 3 arrived the way days arrive when you haven't been sleeping well. Suddenly, with too much light. She was in the study by 6:45. Tae-hyun appeared at 7:10 and found her there with 3 files open across the desk and a legal pad covered in handwriting that had stopped being neat around page 2. He looked at the desk, then at her. "You're in early," he said. "I'm always in early." He poured coffee, his own, from the carafe Seo had left, and sat across from her at the desk. Not beside her. Across. The way you sit when you're preparing to read someone rather than work alongside them. "What are you looking at?" he said. She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Probably nothing," she said. "What kind of nothing?" "The reconciliation kind." She turned the legal pad toward him. 2 instances. Small. Could be formatting. Could be a data export issue. I want to run it against the source documents before I say anything definitive. He looked at the pad. His face did that thing. The neutral that told her nothing. "Where are the source documents?" "That's the question," she said. "The ones I have are secondary summaries. The originals would be in the archive system." "Which archive?" "The pre-2021 physical archive, based on the dates." She paused. "Which I'd need access clearance for." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why didn't you ask Min Seok's team for the reconciliation directly?" She looked back at him with the same steadiness. Because the numbers that don't reconcile are in Min Seok's reports, she said. The silence that followed had a different quality from the ones before it. Heavier. The kind of silence that comes not from nothing being said, but from something being understood. Tae-hyun set his coffee down. The access clearance, he said. I'll arrange it. She nodded and turned the legal pad back toward herself. Neither of them said anything else for the next 20 minutes. They worked at opposite ends of the desk in the early morning quiet, and she was aware of something shifting in the room, not toward anything yet, but away from where it had been. That evening, Min Seok came to the penthouse. She hadn't known he was coming. The visit wasn't on any schedule she'd been given. She was in the corridor near the east study when she heard them in the main room. Not the words, just the register. Min Seok's careful warmth, Tae-hyun's lower frequency. A conversation between men who had known each other for a very long time. She slowed her steps without deciding to. She's sharp, Min Seok was saying, sharper than the others. A pause. Then Tae-hyun. She's useful. Useful. A sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You've had useful assistants before, Tae-hyun. You don't move them into your home. The timing required. The timing? Min Seok's voice stayed warm, stayed easy. Of course. The timing. Silence. Then Min Seok, quieter. Don't let sentiment compromise the week. We're close. Everything depends on the meeting going exactly as planned. Everything always depends on things going exactly as planned, Tae-hyun said. That's not news. No, Min Seok said. It isn't. Amara moved past the doorway without stopping, without changing her pace, without looking in. She went to the study and sat down and opened her laptop and stared at the screen without reading it. She thought about the word sentiment and the way Min Seok had used it, as a warning packaged in concern. She thought about the two numbers that didn't reconcile. She thought about what it meant that they were in Min Seok's reports and nowhere in the source documents she'd been able to access, and about the access request that Tae-hyun had said he'd arrange and that, as of this evening, had not come through. She thought about the calendar. 4 days until the Shindaewoo meeting. 4 days. She opened a new document, started writing, not analysis, not yet, just the facts, in order, clean, and unembellished. She had written half a page when she heard Min Seok's footsteps in the corridor, heading for the elevator, unhurried, a man who felt entirely at home in a space that wasn't his. The footsteps paused, just for a moment, just outside the study door. Then they continued. She kept writing and did not let herself look up until she heard the elevator arrive. On the morning of day 4, the access clearance came through. Tae-hyun left it on the desk. A physical key card and a single index card with a handwritten code. Without comment, without context, without anything written on the index card except the number. She picked it up, turned it over. The back was blank. She went to the archive floor at 9 a.m., when the building was in full operational swing and nobody would notice a level 3 administrative assistant with a key card and a legal pad. The pre-2021 archive was organized by year, by quarter, by submitting division. She knew the dates she needed. She pulled the files without difficulty, carried them to the reading table at the center of the room, and opened the first one. She found the third anomaly in 11 minutes, then the fourth, then a fifth. She stopped counting at 8. These were not rounding errors. They were not formatting issues or data export quirks. They were deliberate, small enough to survive routine review, structured in a pattern that moved money in amounts that individually meant nothing and collectively meant something she didn't have the full picture of yet. The kind of pattern that required patience and precision and intimate knowledge of where the oversight gaps were. The kind of pattern that took years to build. Her pen had stopped moving somewhere around anomaly 6. She was just reading now, page after page, cross-referencing dates and amounts and division codes, and the picture that was assembling itself in the reading table light was one she didn't want to be holding. She sat back. The archive room was cold and smelled like paper and climate control and the specific staleness of things preserved. She thought about Min Seok's smile, his precision, the way he had built his warmth so carefully that it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. She thought about a man who had served beside Tae-hyun for over a decade, who had watched him build an empire, who knew every procedure and protocol and predictable pattern, and who had spent that entire time quietly, methodically, doing something else. She thought about the meeting, 4 days away. Everything depends on the meeting going exactly as planned. She gathered the files. She aligned the edges with both hands, the way she always did when she was trying to think clearly through something that was making her hands unsteady. She put them back in the drawer in exactly the order she'd found them. She walked to the elevator with her legal pad and her pen, and the weight of what she'd found settling across her shoulders like something she hadn't agreed to carry. In the elevator on the way back up, she thought about what you do when the thing you've discovered is too large to hand to anyone without knowing first whose hands you're giving it to. She thought about Tae-hyun's face that morning at the desk, the careful neutral, the coffee, the gap where something almost showed. She thought, I don't know him well enough to trust him with this. She thought, I know him well enough to know I have to. The elevator opened on 31. She stepped out into the corridor and walked toward the penthouse, and she was 3 steps from the door when her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. No text. Just an image. She looked at it. It was a photograph of her. Taken from a distance, telephoto probably, the angle suggesting somewhere across the street or above. Today. This morning. Entering the archive building. Nothing else. No caption. No number to call back. She stood in the corridor with her phone and her legal pad and the cold feeling of someone who has been watching longer than you knew, and understood with complete clarity that she was no longer in the position of someone who had accidentally stumbled onto something inconvenient. She was in the position of someone who had been noticed. She put the phone in her pocket, opened the penthouse door, walked in. Tae-hyun was at the main desk, on a call. He looked up when she entered and read something in her face. She saw him read it, saw the shift behind his eyes, and said into the phone, I'll call you back, and set it down. What happened? He said. Not a question. She put the legal pad on the desk in front of him. She put her phone beside it, screen up, photograph visible. Then she said, I need you to tell me how much you trust Han Min-seok. And she watched his face do something she had never seen it do before. Not the neutral, not the controlled distance, but something that moved beneath the surface like a fault line that had been waiting for exactly this much pressure. Tae-hyun didn't answer right away. That was the thing she would remember later. Not the answer itself, but the pause before it. The way a man who never hesitated sat completely still for 4 full seconds with his eyes on the photograph and his hands flat on the desk and something moving behind his face that she had no name for yet. Then he said, 12 years. That's not what I asked. It's the answer to what you asked. He picked up the phone, looked at the photograph, set it back down. 12 years. He was my father's man before he was mine. He was in the room when I took over. He has been in every room that mattered since. Amara sat down across from him without being invited to. She pulled the legal pad toward her and opened it to the page where she'd started writing in the archive room. The facts, in order, clean, and unembellished. Then you need to read this, she said, all of it, before I explain what I think it means. He read. She watched him read. He was a fast reader. She already knew that. Had seen him move through 30-page documents in the time it took her to settle into the first section. But this was different. He read slowly, went back, read a section again. His right hand moved to the edge of the page and held it there like he was anchoring himself to something physical, while the rest of him processed what was in front of him. When he finished, he closed the pad. Didn't look up immediately. How many instances? He said. 8 confirmed. Possibly more in the 2019 quarterly reports, but I didn't have time to pull all of them. Amounts. Small individually, between 40 and 90 million, one per instance in the visible records. But the pattern suggests those are the transfer nodes, not the total. If someone was moving serious money, these would be the edges of it, the parts visible from where I was standing. He finally looked up. You're saying there's a center. I'm saying there's always a center, she said. And I'm saying whoever built this structure knew your systems well enough to find every oversight gap and build around it. That takes time. That takes access. And that takes someone whose reports go into your archive without a second review because nobody questions them. Tae-hyun stood up. not abruptly, just the controlled movement of a man who needed to not be sitting anymore. He walked to the window. The city was fully lit now, midday sharp and gray with November cloud cover. "The meeting," he said. "Thursday. Shindaewu." Min-seok arranged the venue logistics. She had not known that. She kept her face still. Who else was involved in venue selection? His team, 3 people from logistics. He paused. All of them reporting to Min-seok. She wrote that down on a clean page, not because she needed the note, because having something to write gave her hands something to do while her brain caught up with the shape of what they were looking at. "I need to make a call," he said. He was still facing the window. "To who?" "Someone who can verify the financial trail faster than—" "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. He turned. She held her ground. "If Min-seok has had 12 years of access, you don't know who else is connected to him. A call to the wrong person right now tells him you know." Silence. "And the photograph," she said. "Someone took that image of me outside the archive building this morning. That means someone was watching for exactly that. Someone going into the pre-2021 records, which means they know what's in there and they know I found it." He turned fully away from the window. His face had done it again. That thing underneath the neutral, the fault line. "You're saying he already knows you know." "I'm saying it's possible." She paused. "Which means the timeline just changed." He crossed the room in 6 steps and sat back down at the desk and pulled the legal pad toward him again. He stared at her handwriting on the page, the facts, the dates, the amounts. And she watched him do the things she'd seen him do with documents before, not read them again but see them differently. The way you look at a landscape after someone tells you what's buried underneath it. 3 days, he said, until the meeting. Yes. If I pull the meeting, whoever is behind this knows I know. If I attend without knowing the full structure, you walk into something that's been designed around your predictability, she said. He looked at her. Your systems, she said, your patterns, your routines. Whoever planned this used everything you've built to plan around you. The meeting venue, the time, probably the security configuration. All of it based on how you always do things. He said nothing. The question, she said carefully, isn't whether to go. I think you've already decided that. She watched his face. The question is how to go in a way that's different from what they're expecting, which means breaking your own patterns, which means, she stopped. Which means what, he said. Which means trusting someone outside your established structure to help you do it, because everyone inside your structure has been inside it long enough to be compromised. The silence that followed was the longest yet. Then he said, I need to speak with Min-seok. That's not to confront him. His voice was flat. To verify. There's a difference between a pattern in an archive report and evidence of what you're suggesting. I need to hear him. Watch him. She understood that. She didn't like it, but she understood it. 12 years was 12 years. You didn't just accept that someone had hollowed that out without needing to see it for yourself. When? She said. Tonight. I'll arrange a dinner, standard practice. Pre-meeting review. Nothing he'd find unusual. And I'll be there. He looked at her. You'll be here. I'll be there, she said again, with the same steadiness. Because you need someone in that room who isn't afraid of him. Everyone else has spent 12 years learning to trust him. I've spent 4 days not doing that. You need that in the room. Another pause. You'll be there, he said finally. As my assistant, reviewing materials. That's fine. Don't engage him. I won't. Don't let him know you've been in the archive. I know. He looked at her for a moment longer with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not gratitude, not warmth, not the professional distance he usually maintained, but something in the gap between all of those that didn't have a clean name. Why? He said. She looked at him. Why are you doing this? He said. You're an administrative assistant. You found something uncomfortable in a financial archive. The correct professional response is to document it and hand it up the chain and let someone else carry it. She thought about that, genuinely thought about it, the way she thought about things she was going to say out loud. Because the chain has a hole in it, she said, and I found the hole. And I can't hand something to a chain with a hole in it and tell myself I did the right thing. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a secondary phone. Not his primary, a backup, the kind with no history on it, and started making the call to arrange dinner. She picked up her legal pad and walked to the east study and closed the door softly behind her and sat down and breathed for the first time in what felt like an hour. Her hands were shaking, just slightly. She pressed them flat on the desk. She thought, I should not be here. She thought, I am exactly where I should be. The dinner was at 8. Small, private, just Taehyun, Min Seok, and 2 other senior staff who filled out the table without being central to the room. Amara sat at the far end with a laptop and a folder, the standard position of an assistant at a working dinner, present and peripheral, and officially unremarkable. Min Seok arrived precisely on time. He was in charcoal gray, silver cufflinks, the full presentation. He shook hands with the senior staff, exchanged brief words, settled into his chair with the ease of a man who had sat in rooms like this one so many times that the room itself felt like it belonged to him. He looked at Amara once when he came in. A glance. Pleasant. The same warm imprecision with which he'd looked at her before, present enough to be polite, vague enough to say nothing. She looked at her laptop, typed something that didn't matter, filed the look away. The first 40 minutes were professional and unremarkable. They moved through the pre-meeting agenda, Shin Daewoo approach, talking points, the configuration of who said what in what order. Min Seok spoke with authority and ease. His command of the room was so natural that watching it was like watching someone breathe. You didn't notice the mechanics, just the result. Taehyun was impeccable. She watched him watch Min Seok with the same neutral attention he brought to everything and found nothing in it that would tell you he had spent the afternoon reading 8 anomalies in the old man's financial reports. He asked the right questions. He laughed once, briefly, at something Min Seok said. He was entirely himself and entirely not, and nobody at the table could tell the difference. Amara could tell the difference. She had spent 4 days in a space with him. She knew the rhythm of his attention and could feel where this version was fractionally off, the slight deliberateness of it, the way his stillness was chosen rather than natural. She thought, he is very good at this. She thought, so is Min Seok. It was at the 50-minute mark that it happened. Min Seok was speaking about the venue logistics, the harbor warehouse, the security configuration, the access points, standard pre-meeting detail. Amara was typing notes she would actually need to check later when Min Seok mentioned the communication protocol for the evening. We'll be running on the secondary network, he said. Primary cellular is unreliable in the harbor district. My team has set up a digital relay. All devices route through a central hub. She stopped typing. She did it carefully, fingers simply going still on the keys, no visible change in posture, no look up. A centralized communication hub, at a venue chosen and configured by Min Seok's team, on a night when Taehyun and his senior leadership would all be in one place. Her mind moved through it quickly and coldly. If the relay was compromised, if it wasn't just managing communication but controlling it, then the moment the meeting began, every device in that warehouse would be running through a system Min Seok's people owned. Alerts could be blocked, calls out could be intercepted. The entire security structure that Taehyun's team would bring in could be made effectively deaf. She kept her eyes on the screen. She typed, secondary network, central hub, Min Seok team, all devices. Taehyun said, what's the backup if the hub fails? It won't fail, Min Seok said, pleasantly. Everything fails eventually, Taehyun said. Backup protocol. A small pause, so small that you wouldn't catch it if you weren't measuring. Traditional landline, Min Seok said, in the venue manager's office. Taehyun nodded, moved on. Amara stared at the word she'd just typed and felt the architecture of the thing click into place with the cold precision of a lock turning. Not a meeting, a configuration. Every element of the Shin Daewoo gathering had been built around a single purpose that had nothing to do with a merger, and the man who had built it was sitting 6 feet away, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, drinking wine at Taehyun's table. After dinner, Min Seok took his leave with the same ease with which he'd arrived. He said goodnight to the staff. He said something brief and private to Taehyun near the door, She couldn't hear it, and Tae-hyun responded with a nod and a hand briefly gripped. The handshake of men who have known each other a long time. Min-sok looked at her once more on his way out. This time the warmth was still there, still perfectly placed, but underneath it, and she might have been wrong, she accounted for the possibility that she was wrong, was something else. An assessment, brief and cold and gone before it fully formed. Then he was in the elevator and the doors closed, and she was looking at the polished metal of the closed doors and breathing in a way she was trying to make look normal. She turned. Tae-hyun was already looking at her from across the room. The senior staff were still at the table. He crossed to her, stopped close, closer than he normally stood, close enough that what he said next would not carry. "You heard it," he said. Quiet, flat, not a question. "The communication hub." Her voice was the same register as his. "Yes. Talk me through it." "Not here." She glanced at the staff at the table. He followed her look. 15 minutes, he said, and went back to the table. She went to the east study, sat down, looked at her hands. Still now. Steady. She was aware of a specific quality of calm that descended sometimes when she stopped being afraid of a thing and started being angry about it instead. She thought about the warehouse. She thought about a room full of people who trusted Tae-hyun, walking in through configured access points, handing their devices to a communication system that someone else owned. She thought about what happens when armed men know exactly where to go and the people inside can't call out. She thought about Min-suk's face at the elevator, that brief, cold thing. She was still thinking when Tae-hyun came in 22 minutes later. Not 15, because the senior staff had questions, because everything had questions, because the world didn't pause for clarity. He closed the door. She told him. All of it. The hub, the configuration, what it would mean for the security team, the sequence she'd walked through in her head during the 15 minutes she'd waited. She laid it out in the same order she always laid things out. The facts first, then the inference, then the question at the end of the inference. The question at the end was, how many people know the complete security configuration for Thursday night? He said, Min-seok's logistics team, my head of security. Min-seok himself. Your head of security, she said. How long has he been with you? A pause. 8 years, Tae-hyun said. Under Min-seok's recommendation. The pause this time was different. Yes, he said. She looked at him. He was standing in the center of the room, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked like someone who was standing in a room that had gotten smaller without him noticing, and was only now feeling the walls. The meeting is in 3 days, she said. I know. You cannot brief your security team on a change of plan without Min-seok knowing within the hour. I know. Which means anything you do differently has to happen through people outside the chain. I have people outside the chain, he said. His voice was steady, but there was something in it she hadn't heard before. Not fear, not quite. The sound of a man recalculating everything he thought he'd built. 2, maybe 3 I can reach without a trail. That's not enough for a warehouse. No, he said. It isn't. She thought for a moment. Her pen was in her hand and she hadn't remembered picking it up. Okay, she said. So we don't fix the security configuration. We can't without tipping it. But if the plan requires everyone to be in one predictable place, then the one thing that breaks it is unpredictability. She paused. What does the plan need that it can't work without? He looked at her. Digital coordination, she said. The hub. If the hub fails, the whole thing falls apart. The communication between whoever is coming in, the timing, the access, the coordination, it all depends on that relay working. You're suggesting we break the hub. I'm suggesting we understand how the hub works first, she said, and then we think about what breaks it. He walked to the desk, sat down across from her. His hands were flat on the surface, same as always, same physical stillness. But his eyes were different. Not the managed neutral, something more direct, more present. You're very calm about this, he said. I'm terrified, she said. I just look calm when I'm terrified. It's a design flaw. Something moved across his face. Not the almost smile from the kitchen. Something more unguarded than that, there and gone before she could fully see it. "What do you need?" he said. "Access to the technical specs for the relay system, whatever Min Seok's team filed for the venue setup." "That goes through his office." "Then we don't go through his office," she thought. The venue filed for permits. The warehouse has a building management office. Permit applications include technical infrastructure filings, what systems are being run, power requirements, signal specifications. It's public record. He looked at her. "It takes time," she said, "but it leaves no trail inside your organization." "You do this." "I do this tonight if you can get me the venue permit filing number." He was quiet for a long moment, looking at her with the particular attention of someone who is deciding something and knows they're deciding it. Then he opened his phone and started typing. While he typed, she thought about Thursday. She thought about the warehouse and the harbor and the darkness outside windows that faced water and the specific quality of a room that has been built to close around people. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, looked at her. "There's a problem," he said. She waited. The venue permit was pulled 3 days ago. Building management received a modification filing. The relay system specs were amended. He turned the phone toward her. "The amendment was signed off by my head of security." She looked at the screen, at the date, at the signature. The amendment had been filed the morning after she'd gone into the archive, the morning after someone had photographed her going into the archive. She looked up at Tae-hyun. He was already looking at her with the expression of a man who had just understood that the walls of the room were not where he'd thought they were. "They know," she said. "Yes." "They know I know. And they moved the timeline." "Yes." "Which means Thursday isn't in 3 days anymore. If they've accelerated..." His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Didn't move for exactly 1 second. Then he answered it. She watched his face while he listened. He said nothing for 30 seconds. Then he said, "How many?" Then he said, "When?" Then he said nothing for another stretch, and she watched the fault line happen again. That thing beneath the surface. And this time, it didn't go away. He ended the call. "Min Seok just reached out to the Busan Syndicate," he said. His voice was perfectly flat. The flatness of something that has been pressed too hard and gone past the point of natural tone. "They've been told the Thursday meeting is a reorganization summit, that I'm planning to absorb the Busan and Incheon operations forcibly, that it's a trap." She sat very still. "They've been told," he continued, "that the way to prevent a takeover is to move first, to come to the meeting prepared for that, together." She heard it, felt it land. The full architecture, finally visible. Min Seok hadn't just been stealing. He hadn't just been planning to remove Tae-hyun. He had been building a war, feeding both sides the fuel for it, positioning himself as the man left standing when the most powerful criminal organizations in Korea walked into a room expecting violence and found exactly what they'd been prepared to bring. "He framed you as the aggressor," she said. "Yes. To the Busan and Incheon families. And possibly Daegu." His voice had not changed in pitch or speed, just that flatness. "If all three arrive at the warehouse believing they're acting defensively against me, it's not an assassination," she said. "It's a massacre with justification. And he's not at the warehouse." "No," Tae-hyun said. "He won't be." She stood up. She didn't know she was going to stand up until she was standing. "You have to cancel the meeting," she said. "If I cancel, the Busan and Incheon families receive confirmation of what he's told them, that I'm maneuvering. The war starts anyway, just without a fixed point. It spreads. If you attend, you walk into a warehouse that's been configured to trap you, with rival syndicates arriving ready for violence, and a communication system you don't control." "Yes," he said. "You'll die," she said. The word came out plain, not dramatic, just factual, the way she said things that were true and needed to be said plainly. "Probably," he said, "if nothing changes." She looked at him. He looked at her. "So something has to change," he said. And there was something in his voice now. Not the flatness, not the neutral, not the carefully maintained control she had spent 14 months mapping from the other side of a closed door. Something that had decided. What breaks a coordinated attack that relies on digital precision and predictable targets? She thought about the warehouse. She thought about the harbor. She thought about analog and digital and the spaces between systems where things fell through. She thought about every time in her life she had been underestimated, every room she had walked into where people had looked at her and calculated something small and been wrong. She thought about chaos, not the embarrassing kind, not the coffee on the blazer kind, but the structural kind. The kind that happens when you stop trying to work within a system and simply introduce something the system cannot account for. She picked up her pen. "Sit down," she said to him. "I need you to tell me everything you know about that warehouse." He told her everything, not all at once, in the way that a man who has spent years guarding information shares it when the alternative is worse than sharing. So, piece by piece, each piece a decision, each decision costing something. The warehouse layout came first. 4 access points, 2 loading bays on the harbor side, an upper mezzanine level that ran the length of the south wall, a basement utility corridor that connected to the building next door through a maintenance junction that hadn't been on any of the permit filings she'd seen. She wrote everything down. She drew the layout on a clean page. Rough, imprecise, but spatially accurate enough to think with. She asked questions when she needed clarity and didn't ask them when she didn't, and he answered without elaboration, which was efficient and which she appreciated. They worked until 2 a.m. At 2 a.m., she looked at what they had and said, "The hub is the fulcrum. Everything Min-Sok's people have built assumes that the communication relay stays operational. Without it, the incoming teams lose coordination. They don't know the access points. They don't know the timing. They don't know where Taehyun is inside the building at any given moment. If they don't know where I am, they don't know where not to shoot," he said. "That's a problem," she agreed. "So the hub creates order for them." "Yes, digital order, coordinated entry, coordinated positioning, coordinated timing." She tapped the pen on the legal pad. "What does digital order need?" "Signal," he said. "Power, a clean frequency." "What does it absolutely cannot survive?" He looked at her layout on the page. Then he looked at something that wasn't on the page, some interior calculation, some thing she couldn't see. Then he said, "An analog broadcast on the same frequency band floods the signal. If it's strong enough and broad enough, it doesn't just interrupt the hub, it makes the hub a liability. Everything running through it becomes noise." She looked at him. "The building next door," he said slowly. "The maintenance junction." "What's in the building next door?" "A Harbor Authority relay station," he said. 30 years old, analog. They use it for emergency maritime broadcast. It hasn't been active in years, but the equipment is still there because nobody filed to decommission it." She sat with that for 4 seconds. "Can it be activated?" she said. "With the right access." "Can you get the right access without going through your organization?" "I know the Harbor Authority night supervisor," he said. "We went to university together. He owes me something that isn't professional." "Would he do it?" A pause. "He'd do it if I asked him directly, not through a chain, directly." She wrote, "Analog broadcast, Harbor Authority, direct contact only." "That's the hub," she said, but the hub going down doesn't stop armed men who are already inside. "You need people in this building." "2 I can reach without trail," he said. "Kang and Park Jinho. Not my standard security. They operate outside the formal structure. They're loyal to me personally." 2 people against however many Min Seok has positioned. 2 people plus the element of surprise, he said, which we only have if nobody knows the plan has changed. She thought about Min Seok, about the dinner, about the handshake at the door, the brief private word, the warmth that had been built so long it had calcified into something structural. "He still thinks you don't know," she said. "As of tonight, yes." "He has to keep thinking that until the meeting starts." "Yes." "Which means you attend. You walk in, you behave exactly as expected until the moment the broadcast goes live." He looked at her steadily. "You could die in the interval," she said, "between walking in and the broadcast activating." "Yes." She looked at her hands on the legal pad. "What's the activation trigger for the broadcast?" "Someone has to physically switch on the relay in the Harbor Authority station. It can't be done remotely. It's analog. It requires manual operation. She already knew what she was going to say. She'd known it, she thought, somewhere around the second hour of this conversation, in the place where you know things before you're ready to say them. Then I'll be in the harbor authority station, she said. He went very still. You'll have your people in the building, she continued. You'll have the communication disruption. But someone has to be at the relay with a watch and a clear signal from you that the time is right. Someone outside the chain. Someone nobody is watching for. She met his eyes. Nobody is watching for me, he said. Amara. It was the first time he had used her first name. She registered it somewhere peripheral, filed it away. Tell me I'm wrong, she said. He didn't. They worked for another 2 hours. By 4 a.m., they had a plan that was not good. She was honest with herself about that, but was the best available option given that all the better options had been closed off by a man who had spent 12 years making sure his contingencies were better than everyone else's. They had a plan that depended on analog equipment nobody had turned on in a decade, 2 men outside the formal security structure, and an administrative assistant with a legal pad who had accidentally sent a voice message to the wrong group chat 11 days ago. She thought, this is how it happens. She thought, not with perfect systems, with the things the perfect systems forgot to account for. At 4:15, she stood up, and her knees were stiff, and she put her hands on the back of the chair and stretched her shoulders and said, I need 4 hours of sleep. He was still at the desk. He hadn't moved in an hour except to write 2 things on a separate piece of paper, which he folded once and put in his inside jacket pocket. The relay station, he said. I'll have Kang take you there tomorrow evening to walk through the equipment. You need to know how to operate it before Thursday. Okay? The timing signal will come from me. My watch, I'll activate the secondary alarm. It transmits on a short-range personal channel that predates the current communication systems. Min Seok's team won't be monitoring it. How will I receive it? He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small device. Not a phone, older than that, the kind of thing that hadn't been manufactured in 15 years. A pager. He set it on the desk. She looked at it. Analog, he said. Analog, she repeated. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. Solid in the way that old things were solid, built before everything got optimized toward lightness. She put it in her blazer pocket. At the door to the east corridor, she stopped. Tae-hyun. He looked up. If this doesn't work, she stopped, started again. If something goes wrong with the timing or the relay or the 2 people you have inside, if any piece of it breaks, then we adapt, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have, he said, not defensively, just plainly, the way things are said when they are the simple truth. I have never survived by having perfect plans. I have survived by being able to move when the plan stops working. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Get some sleep, Brooks, he said. And there was something in it, not warmth, not the managed professional distance, but something that lived in the space between those 2 things, something that knew her name and had decided to use it. She went to the guest room. She did not sleep for 40 minutes. Then she slept like something falling. Thursday arrived the way terrible things arrive. The same as every other day, unremarkable in its early hours, the city waking up in the usual noise and gray light, with no indication that anything was different about this particular Thursday in November. She was at the Harbor Authority Station by 4 p.m. Kang was exactly what she'd expected from a man Tae-hyun trusted outside the formal structure. Compact, quiet, the kind of quiet that came from having learned when words were necessary and when they weren't. He walked her through the relay equipment without editorial, the main transmitter, the frequency dial, the manual broadcast switch, a large red lever on the left panel that required both hands and a firm downward pull to engage, the power indicator, the signal meter. How will I know it's working? She said. The needle goes to the right side of the meter, he said. Stays there. If it drops back, pull the lever again. What if the power cuts? There's a generator, here, he pointed. This switch, it takes about 40 seconds to come online. 40 seconds is a long time. Yes, he said without inflating it. She stood in the station and looked at the equipment. Old, analog, entirely physical. No software. Nothing that could be remotely accessed or digitally disrupted, and felt a specific respect for it. Things built before the age of interconnection had a particular quality of self-contained reliability. They didn't depend on anything external, they just were what they were. "When the signal comes," she said, "from the pager." "Pull the lever," he said. "Don't wait. Don't confirm. Pull it." "Okay." He drove her back to the penthouse at 5:30. She had 2 hours. She changed. Not into anything ceremonial. She didn't have anything ceremonial in the bag she'd packed badly 11 days ago. She put on the dark blazer, the dark trousers, the flat shoes. She brushed her teeth. She looked at herself in the mirror of the guest bathroom for exactly 3 seconds and then stopped, because looking at herself was not useful right now. She went to the main room. Tae-hyun was already dressed. Full executive presentation, the complete armor, charcoal suit with the precise fit of things made for a specific body. His face was the neutral, all the way down, every surface. She had seen him put it on before, but never quite this completely, never with this particular quality of deliberateness. He looked at her when she came in. "Kang walked you through the equipment," he said. "Yes." "You're comfortable with the sequence." "I'm functional with the sequence," she said. Comfortable seems like the wrong word for tonight. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "The cars leave at 7:15, he said. "Kang will take you to the station directly. You'll be in position before the meeting begins at 8. "Min-suk will be watching the entrance." "Min-suk will be somewhere he can observe without being present," Tae-hyun said. "That's his pattern. He has never personally been in a room when something irreversible happened." "Coward's architecture," she said. "Effective architecture," he said. "There's a difference." She thought about that, about how you could build something efficient and terrible and never be in the room when it operated. "He'll know it went wrong," she said. "After. Wherever he is, he'll know." "Yes. What happens to him after?" Tae-hyun looked at her for a moment. "That's not your concern." "I want to know what I'm helping preserve," she said, and she kept her voice level and direct, because this was the thing she had been circling for days, and tonight was the last opportunity to say it plainly. "You have a criminal organization. I know what that means. I'm not naive about what I'm walking into that relay station to protect. I want to know what happens to Min-suk when this is over." He held her gaze. "He will be handled," he said, "internally, by the standards of this world." "That means he dies." A pause. "That means he faces consequences proportionate to what he built." She stood with that. "Is that enough for you?" he said. And there was something in it. Not challenge, not dismissal. A real question. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I've made my choice. I made it in the archive room." He nodded once. At 7:10, he said, "Brooks." She was putting the pager in her blazer pocket. She looked up. He crossed the room toward her, stopped 2 feet away, and for a moment he just looked at her. Not with the neutral, not with the managed executive attention, but with something direct and unguarded that she had only seen flashes of before, and never this sustained, never this close. "If the timing is off," he said, "if anything feels wrong before I signal, you leave. You take Kang's secondary car and you leave. You don't wait for confirmation. You don't come back. And you? I'll manage." "That's not Amara." His voice was quiet. "I need you to agree to this." She looked at him, at the careful constructed control of him, and the thing underneath it that she had spent 11 days learning to see. The man who had built his entire world around order and precision and had spent enough time with chaos to understand finally that he had been building around a gap. "Okay," she said. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out the folded piece of paper, the one he'd written on at 4 a.m., and put away. He held it out. She took it, didn't open it. "After," he said. Just that. She put it in her pocket, next to the pager. The cars left at 7:15. She was in the Harbor Authority station at 7:48. Kang stationed himself at the exterior door. She was alone with the equipment, The low industrial hum of the old building, the smell of salt and metal, and the harbor outside the single window where the water was black and the warehouse lights were visible across the inlet. She could see the loading bay entrance from here. She could see the cars arriving. Tae-hyun's convoy, right on time, 3 vehicles. The security configuration she now knew had been fed to Min-suk's people, down to the number and positioning of the men. She watched Tae-hyun get out of the center vehicle. Even from this distance, in the dark, she knew which one was him by the way he moved. The controlled economy of it. Nothing wasted. A man who had learned that every movement communicated something and had chosen what to communicate. He walked into the warehouse. The doors closed. 7:53. She stood at the transmitter and put her right hand on the broadcast lever and watched the window and waited. 8:01. The other vehicles arrived. Busan plates, Incheon plates, the configuration she'd memorized from the organizational notes. 4 vehicles. More than expected. 8:04. The loading bay doors closed from the inside. 8:06. The lights in the warehouse shifted, visible even from across the inlet, a change in the quality of illumination, something from the upper mezzanine level powering on. She gripped the lever. 8:08. Nothing. 8:09. Nothing. 8:10. She became aware of her own heartbeat in the specific way you become aware of it when everything goes quiet around it. She could hear Kang's boots on the concrete outside the door. She could hear the water against the harbor pylons. She could hear the pager in her pocket, which was currently silent, which was the only thing she needed it not to be. 8:12. A sound from across the water. Not loud, distance filtered it, but she knew what it was. She had heard enough of those sounds in enough films and had spent enough time being told those sounds were one way until you understood they were another. She gripped the lever with both hands. The pager went off. She pulled. The lever engaged with a physical thunk that went up her arms to her shoulders, and the signal meter needle swung hard to the right, and the transmitter filled the room with a low oscillating frequency that she felt in her back teeth, and the power indicator burned green, and she held the lever down and didn't let go. Across the inlet, the lights in the warehouse changed again. She didn't know what was happening inside. She couldn't know. She was standing in a 30-year-old analog relay station with her hands on a lever, counting seconds, watching a window, trusting a plan that had been built at 4 a.m. by 2 people running on no sleep and the specific clarity that comes from having no better option. She thought, hold. She thought, just hold. At 8:17, the loading bay doors on the harbor side of the warehouse burst open. 3 men came out running, not Tae-hyun's configuration, not the people she'd memorized. Strangers, armed, moving in the fractured way of people whose coordination has just collapsed. They separated at the dock edge, 2 going left toward the vehicle bay, one stopping and looking at something in his hand, a device, a phone, or a radio, with the body language of someone whose equipment has just told him something impossible. The signal meter held. She held. 8:19. More movement at the loading bay. Controlled this time, the specific controlled movement of people who know where they're going. She counted 2, then 4, then she couldn't see clearly enough to be precise. 8:22. Silence from the inside of the warehouse. The particular silence that comes after things have stopped. 8:24. Her arms were shaking, not from fear, from the sustained physical effort of holding the lever in position for 12 minutes with the full weight of it pushing back. She didn't let go. 8:27. Her phone, the secondary phone Kang had given her, not her primary, no connection to Min-suk's network, buzzed once in her left jacket pocket. 1 word. From Kang's number, clear. She let go of the lever. Her arms dropped. She stood with them hanging at her sides for approximately 3 seconds, breathing. The signal meter needle swung back. The transmitter hum decreased. The green indicator dimmed. She looked at the window. The warehouse lights were steady now. All of them, the full configuration, the interior fully lit like a building that had stopped pretending to be something else. She sat down on the floor of the relay station because her legs decided, without her input, that sitting was what they needed to do. She sat on the cold concrete with her back against the transmitter panel and her hands in her lap and breathed. The pager was still in her blazer pocket. The folded piece of paper was still in the other pocket. She could feel both of them. The door opened, Kang's silhouette in the frame. "We need to move," he said. She stood. Her knees reported back to her with a detailed account of the last 3 hours. She filed it away. "Taehyun," she said. "Alive," Kang said. "Moving. He'll be at the secondary location in 20 minutes." She walked to the door, stopped. "Min-seok," she said. Kang looked at her. His face gave her the same information it always gave her, which was almost nothing. "Picked up," he said, 30 minutes ago, from a hotel in Gangnam, where he'd been watching the harbor feed. She thought about that. About a man in a hotel room watching a feed of a harbor he'd thought he'd configured. About the moment the feed went wrong. "Was he alone?" she said. "No," Kang said. "He had a lawyer." She walked out of the relay station into the cold November air, and the harbor was dark, and the city was lit, and somewhere across the inlet, a warehouse was being processed by men who knew what to do with the aftermath of things. And she walked to the car and got in and closed the door and sat in the back seat while Kang drove and looked at the city moving past the window and thought about the folded piece of paper in her pocket. She didn't open it, not yet. The secondary location was a building she hadn't been to before. Not the penthouse, not the office, something in between. A floor of a building in Yeouido that had the specific quality of a space maintained for contingencies. Clean, sparse, functional in the way of rooms that exist to be used in exactly this kind of moment and nothing else. Taehyun was there when she arrived. He was standing at the window again. Different window, different city view, same posture, hands at his sides, back to the room, the specific stillness of someone processing. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that had been cleaned but not properly closed. His jacket was gone. The gray shirt had a tear at the collar. She stood in the doorway. He turned. They looked at each other across the length of the room, and she thought about everything that fit inside that distance. 11 days, 14 months, 43 seconds of audio, 8 anomalies in a financial archive, a broadcast lever she had held for 12 minutes with both hands while her arms burned, and didn't try to say any of it because it wouldn't fit in words anyway. "The signal held," he said. "Yes," she said. "You held it the full window." "Yes." He crossed the room, stopped in front of her. Close. The same close as the night before the plan. The same geography of proximity she still hadn't learned how to categorize. The cut above his eyebrow was worse close up. She could see that it needed actual attention. "You need stitches," she said. "I need a lot of things," he said. She looked at the cut, then at him. Then she said, "Tell me everyone who needs medical attention in this building right now, and let's start there." Something broke open in his face. Not a part, not a collapse. More like a thing that had been sealed for a very long time, making a decision to open, just slightly, just enough. He almost smiled. This time she saw the whole shape of it. The medical kit was in a cabinet in the second room. She found it without asking because she had spent 11 days learning the logic of spaces that Taehyun occupied, and his logic always put contingency supplies in secondary rooms, accessible without passing through the primary space. The kit was comprehensive, more comprehensive than any civilian first aid box had any business being, which told her everything she needed to know about how often this secondary location had been used for exactly this kind of night. She brought it to the main room. Taehyun was sitting now on the edge of the low couch, elbows on his knees, head slightly forward. The cut above his eyebrow had started bleeding again. Slowly, the way cuts do when the adrenaline that had been holding everything together starts to ease off. He didn't touch it. He was looking at the floor with the focused, unfocused gaze of someone whose body is present and whose mind is still in a warehouse across the city, running through every second of the last hour. She sat on the table in front of him. That put them at eye level. She opened the kit, found the sterile strips and the antiseptic, and said, "Hold still." "I've had worse," he said. "I know, hold still anyway." He held still. She cleaned the cut with a focus that was partly clinical and partly the thing she did when she needed her hands occupied in order to think clearly. He didn't flinch at the antiseptic. She hadn't expected him to. She applied the closure strips with the careful pressure of someone who understood that doing this wrong would mean doing it again, and he watched her do it from the 3 inches of distance between their faces and said nothing. When she was done, she sat back, looked at her work. Adequate. Not perfect, but adequate. And adequate was what tonight had produced across the board, and she had made her peace with that. "How many of your people?" she said. "2 injured. Not critical." He straightened. 3 of Min Seok's people from inside the building. They were hired external, not organization. They'll receive care and be processed. He paused. The Busan and Incheon representatives, when the communication dropped and my people reached them directly, the truth of what Min Seok had told them became apparent. They withdrew. There was a confrontation at the entrance, but it didn't escalate past a confrontation. She absorbed that. They believed you. They believed that the alternative explanation that Min Seok had manipulated both sides into a war that benefited only him was more consistent with what they'd seen of him over the years than the version where I was planning a hostile absorption. He looked at her. It helped that I had documentation. Your documentation. She'd left him copies of everything before the cars had departed. Everything she'd written on the legal pad, photographed and sent to his secondary phone. "What about Min Seok?" she said. "In custody," Tae-hyun said. "My people are with him. He will answer for what he built." "In your system," she said, "not in anyone else's." Yes. She thought about that, about what it meant to be answered for in a system that had its own rules and its own proportions, and no courthouse, no public record, no appeals process. She had thought about this for 11 days, since the archive room, since the reading table, and the 8 anomalies, and the cold smell of preserved paper. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "When this is finished, when everything is processed and settled, I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I know about your organization." She kept her voice level, not accusatory, just plain. "I'm not going to carry it around as a weapon, and I'm not going to go anywhere with it. But I'm also not going to behave as though the last 11 days were just an interesting work assignment and go back to filing documents on 31. "I know," he said. "I mean, I'm saying I can't." "Amara," he said. "I know, that conversation, what comes after, I want to have it. When tonight is finished, when there's been some sleep and some clarity." He looked at her steadily. "But I want to have it. I'm not ending this tonight by handing you a car and a resignation letter." She looked at him. "Okay," she said. Then, "You have a lawyer to deal with." He almost smiled again. She was accumulating evidence that the thing he did with the corner of his mouth was, in fact, a smile. Just one that had been so rarely used it hadn't fully developed the surrounding muscle memory. He stood. "Get some sleep. There's a room in the back." "I know," she said. "Same logic as the medical kit." He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked to the corridor and she heard him on the phone, the low, authoritative frequency of a man who had a very full night ahead of him. And she gathered the medical kit and put it back in the second room and went to find the back room he'd mentioned and lay down on top of the covers without taking her shoes off and was asleep in under 3 minutes. She slept for 5 hours. When she woke, the building was quiet in a different way. Not the quiet of suspended action, but the quiet of aftermath. The specific silence that settles in when a crisis has resolved, and everyone has gone somewhere to process it separately. She sat up. Her blazer was still on. The pager was still in her pocket, along with the folded piece of paper she still hadn't opened. She opened it now. It was written in his handwriting. Compact, precise, the same handwriting she'd seen on index cards and margins of documents throughout 11 days of living inside his professional world. 8 lines. No heading. No date. She read it. She read it again. Then she folded it back along its original crease and put it in her pocket and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment with her hands in her lap, and the particular feeling of someone who has been given something they didn't ask for and aren't sure yet what to do with it. She would think about it later. That was the decision she made in that moment. Not avoidance, she was not by nature an avoider, just order. One thing at a time. Tonight had been a thing. The letter was the next thing. She would give it its own time. She found a bathroom, washed her face, looked at herself in this mirror for longer than 3 seconds, because this time looking at herself felt like something she needed to do. An accounting, a reckoning with the face of a person who had walked into a harbor authority station with a legal pad and a plan built at 4 a.m. and pulled a broadcast lever for 12 minutes while armed men moved across the water. The face that looked back at her was tired, coffee brown, full-cheeked, the kind of tired that had gone past the cosmetic stage into something structural. There was a slight shake in her hands when she held them up in front of the mirror. Not fear, she thought, the aftermath of sustained effort. The way muscles reported in after being asked to hold something for a very long time. She pressed her hands flat against the cool of the sink edge and waited until they stilled. Then she went to find coffee. Tae-hyun was in the main room. He had changed. Different shirt, the charcoal jacket gone, dark trousers, and had the look of a man who had not slept but had made deliberate use of the hours. There were documents on the table. His secondary phone was face up beside them. He was reading when she came in and looked up when he heard her. "Coffee's in the side cabinet," he said. She found it, poured 2 cups on the rationale that he looked like he also needed one, and she put his on the table beside the documents and sat across from him. He picked it up, drank. Didn't acknowledge the gesture, but he didn't need to. She had given up somewhere around day 2 of the penthouse, expecting acknowledgement for practical kindness. He operated on a receipt system, not a thank you system. You could see he'd registered something by what he did next, not what he said. What he did next was push the documents to one side and look at her directly, with the full attention, the kind she'd identified over 11 days as the one that meant he was not performing attention but actually giving it. "Min-seok confessed," he said. She set her cup down. "Overnight, he didn't hold out, he paused, which surprised me. He has never been someone who gave anything away without a reason." "What did he say?" "That it started 7 years ago, a side arrangement with the Daegu organization that began as information sharing and became financial collaboration." He looked at the table, not at the documents, at the surface itself, the way you look at something neutral when you're saying something that isn't. He believed the organization had peaked under my leadership, that I was too rigid, that I would either plateau or break, and he wanted to position himself to manage the pieces. She was quiet for a moment. "He said all of that, in detail." A pause. "He also said that when you arrived, when you started asking the kinds of questions that nobody else asked, he considered having you removed from the building, the first week." She felt something cold pass through her sternum. "He decided against it," Tae-hyun continued, "because removing a level 3 administrative assistant conspicuously would have drawn more attention than letting you stay and managing what you could access." A beat. "He underestimated what you'd find because he underestimated you." He said that too. She absorbed that. "What does he want in exchange for the confession?" "Consideration," Tae-hyun said. "He wants to be handled rather than the alternative." "And is he going to get it?" Tae-hyun looked at her steadily. "He's going to get a fair reckoning by the standards of this world, which are not merciful, but which are, in their way, proportionate. He built something over 7 years that put every person in my organization at risk. He manipulated 2 criminal families toward violence. He put a civilian in the path of it." A pause. "He will not walk away from this. But he will have a trial of sorts, a hearing. People he has wronged will be heard. That's more than he gave anyone else." She thought about that for a long moment. "You believe in that," she said. "The proportionality." "I believe in it for my world," he said. "I don't pretend it translates." "It doesn't," she said. "I'm not going to pretend it does." "I know." "And the Busan and Incheon families. Meetings are scheduled for next week, direct, with documentation of everything Min-seok constructed between us. The financial evidence you compiled from the archive will be part of what I present to them." He looked at her. "Your documentation, your handwriting on a legal pad. That's going into a meeting with 2 of the most powerful criminal organizations in Korea." "I wrote it in pencil," she said. "Sorry about that." This time the corner of his mouth went all the way, the full shape of it. She added it to the evidence file she was accumulating about who he actually was when the neutral came down. "There's something else," he said. His voice shifted, not in tone, just in weight. She'd learned the difference. The Section 9 clause you flagged, the one you left a note about on the Shindaewoo folder, the morning of the voice message incident. She had almost forgotten about Section 9. It seemed like it had happened in a different era. It would have cost us the deal, he said. In diligence, when Shindaewoo's legal team ran their review, they would have found the indemnification gap and used it to renegotiate the entire valuation downward, significantly. He looked at her. Legal team ran it last night while you were sleeping. Confirmed. They're amending the clause before the rescheduled signing. She thought about the morning she had left that note. The morning she had been awake since 4:30, and the folder had a soft, papery wilt at the corner from the rain, and she'd tucked her analysis inside the front cover because she hadn't been asked for it and didn't know if it would matter. Okay, she said. That's all you have to say about it. It was a standard clause analysis, she said. I would have done it for any document. I know, he said. That's the point. They sat with the coffee and the documents and the morning quiet of the aftermath for a little while. The city outside had been moving for hours. She could hear it, that constant urban undercurrent. And it was strange and also somehow right that the city didn't know about the warehouse or the relay station or the archive room or the legal pad or any of it. The city just moved, the way it always moved, indifferent in the specific way of large things to the small catastrophes and small salvations happening inside them. I read the letter, she said. He didn't react. He'd known she would. He'd written it knowing that she would read it in her own time, and that was the kind of thing you did when you respected someone's pace. You put the thing in their hands and waited. You don't have to respond to it now, he said. I know. She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. I want to. He waited. You wrote that you want me to stay, she said. Not as an assistant. You were specific about that. Not as an assistant. Yes. You wrote that you understand if that's not something I want, that you're aware of what I know about your organization, and you're not going to ask me to pretend that's uncomplicated. Yes. And you wrote that you've been wrong about a number of things. She looked at him. You were pretty specific there, too, about what you were wrong about. He held her gaze. I was. You were wrong about control, she said, about what it costs. You built something that ran on fear and precision, and you called it strength, and the thing it cost you was everyone around you being too afraid to tell you when something was wrong. Min Seok had 7 years. 7 years of anomalies that nobody flagged because the culture you'd built didn't allow for the kind of questioning that would have caught it. He didn't look away. Yes. That's what I saw from my desk on 31, she said. Everyone moving like they were afraid of stillness. Nobody eating lunch. Nobody telling you things you didn't want to hear. Except you, he said. I told you the filing system was wrong, and you made me put it back. You were right about the filing system, he said. I know I was. He almost smiled again. She had stopped keeping count. You were right, he said, and I was defending a habit I dressed up as a system. That's what you do when you've been running on control long enough. You stop being able to tell the difference between a good process and a process you're attached to because you built it. She looked at him, at the cut above his eyebrow, her closure strips, her work, adequate and holding, at the tiredness in his face that was different from her tiredness. Hers was the tiredness of a person who had done more than expected. His was the tiredness of a person who had looked at his own architecture and found the flaw inside it. I'm not going back to 31, she said. I know. And I'm not going to be your assistant in a different office, or your whatever title gets built around the shape of what the last 11 days have been. I know, he said. That's not what I meant. Tell me what you meant. He was quiet for a moment. Not the performed quiet, not the silence of a man waiting to be correct. The quiet of someone choosing words with care because the words mattered. I meant that I want you to be involved in what comes next, he said, in rebuilding what Min Seok damaged, in the meeting with the Busan and Incheon families, in the structural review of how this organization operates, because you identified the gap the 12 years of internal process missed, and that's not luck. That's the way you think, and I don't want to lose that. He paused. But I also meant beyond the professional. I meant that personally. I meant that I have spent a long time in rooms by myself, and I didn't know what that cost until someone came into those rooms and made them different. She sat with that. It was a lot. She knew it was a lot. She also knew that he was not a man who said things like this casually, that every word she'd heard from him in 11 days had been precisely chosen and deliberately deployed, and this was the most words she had heard him use about something that wasn't a contract or a contingency plan. I need time, she said, to think about what I want. Not the professional part. I can see the professional part clearly, but the personal part. I need to think about it as myself, not as the person I've been for the last 11 days. All right, he said immediately. That's it? All right? You've earned the right to take whatever time you need, he said. I'm not going to negotiate that. She looked at him. He looked back at her. And she thought, this is the thing. Not the handsome, not the arrogant, not the feared Mafia boss that she had described to her sister in 43 seconds of exhausted honesty. This. The man who could say all right, without conditions, and mean it. Okay, she said. Then, I'm going home today. Kang will drive you. I'll take a cab. He considered this. Kang will drive you, he said again, but this time it was different. Not the executive directive, not the certainty of a man who expected compliance. More like concern trying to put on familiar clothes. She let him have that one. She packed what there was to pack. Not much. The badly assembled bag from 11 days ago. And she walked through the penthouse one more time, because that was where they brought her in the end, the secondary location only lasting through the night before his people moved them back in the early hours. She walked through the room with the charcoal furniture and the view of the Han River that she'd looked at the first night without knowing what any of it meant. The e-study where she'd written facts in order on a legal pad at 5:50 in the morning. The kitchen where she'd made coffee for two without being asked, and he'd picked up the second cup without commenting. The guest room. The bed she'd sat on the first night, carefully, afraid of leaving a mark. She was not afraid of leaving marks anymore. She thought that was worth noting, internally. Kang drove her back across the city in the early light of a Friday morning that looked exactly like every other Friday morning Seoul had ever produced. Traffic building, street vendors setting up, the Han River gray-green under the cloud cover that November maintained like a permanent policy. She got home. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. This was obvious. Nobody had been in it, but there was something still mildly disorienting about a space that had stayed the same while you had moved through 11 days of something that had changed the measurements of everything. She made tea because she had run out of coffee. She sat at her kitchen table with the tea and the view of the building across the narrow street and her phone and the pager she'd set on the table beside her cup, and she called her sister. Dara answered on the second ring. Tell me everything, Dara said. I need 4 hours of sleep first. Tell me and then sleep. She told her. Not all of it. There were things she could not tell anyone, not yet, maybe not ever, the specific category of things that lived inside what she now understood about the organization and the world around it. But she told Dara the shape of it, the archive, the relay station, the lever she'd held for 12 minutes, the letter. There was a long silence from Dara's end when she finished. The letter, Dara said. Yes. You have it with you. In my pocket. Read me what it says. No, she said. Amara, it's mine, she said. Not defensive, just clear. It was written to me. I'll tell you what I told him, that I need time to think about what I want as myself. Not as the person who just survived something, as myself. Another pause. Are you okay? Dara said. Not the checking in version, the real version, the one that came after enough years of sisterhood to know the difference between performing wellness and having it. She thought about it honestly. I'm tired, she said. I'm uncertain about some things. I feel altered, like the dimensions of myself shifted slightly and I need to relearn where my edges are. She paused. But I'm okay, yes. He kept you, Dara said. Not yet, Amara said. He offered. I haven't answered. You will, Dara said. Probably, she said, and felt the truth of it, The way you feel the shape of a decision that's already been made in the part of you that decides things before your conscious mind signs off on them. Eventually, she slept for 6 hours. Not the dead sleep of pure exhaustion, but the real sleep, the kind that moved through stages, the kind that meant her body had decided the crisis was resolved and normal processing could resume. She woke at 4 in the afternoon and made the tea that had gone cold into fresh tea and sat again at the kitchen table and took the letter out of her pocket and read it a third time, slowly, in the good afternoon light. She read the part where he said he had been wrong about control. The part where he said she had walked into his life like something he hadn't built a system for. And this had turned out to be the only way anything significant had ever actually reached him. The part, near the end, where his handwriting changed slightly, more compressed. The letters closer together, the way writing changes when someone is saying something they haven't said before and isn't certain of the mechanics. The part where he said, "I don't know how to ask for what I'm asking. I've spent my entire adult life learning to take what I needed without asking for it. But I am asking. I want to learn to do this differently. I think you're the only person I have met who would require me to." She folded the letter, put it back in her pocket. She thought about Dara saying, "He kept you." She thought about his face when she'd said, "Tell me what you meant." The careful words, "All right," without conditions. She thought about a clumsy, tired, deeply imperfect woman who had sent a voice message to the wrong group chat and called her boss arrogant and handsome in 43 seconds of honest exhaustion, and who had somehow become the most disruptive variable in an empire built on perfect order. She thought about what you do when you've been changed by something. You could try to go back to the shape you were before, resume the counting of ceiling tiles, the careful management of the distance between what you meant and what you said, the practiced invisibility of the person who was good at her job and never asked for more than the job. She could do that. She knew how to do that. Or you could be what the 11 days had made you, what the archive room had made you, what 12 minutes of holding a lever with both hands and shaking arms and a pager in your pocket had made you. She already knew which one she was going to do. She'd known since she read the letter the first time. She took her phone and sent a message. Not to Tae-hyun, not yet. To Dara. 2 words. "I know." Dara responded in 3 seconds, obviously. She set the phone down and finished her tea and started thinking about what she actually wanted. What she wanted was not simple. She had been honest about that with herself, from the kitchen in the penthouse to the archive room to the relay station and back again. She wanted the professional involvement, the work, the thinking, the application of the way her mind moved through problems to something that actually used it. She wanted that without the title of assistant and without the title of anything else that was just a different shape of the same invisibility. She wanted to be in rooms because she had earned a place in them, not because someone powerful had decided to bring her along. She wanted, and this was harder to think plainly because it required admitting it directly, she wanted him. The person she had found underneath the neutral. The man who had read her notes in the margins and not thrown them away. Who had said all right and meant it. Who had written 8 lines by hand at 4 a.m. and put them in his pocket to give to her later. She wanted both of those things, and she wanted them on her terms, which meant she was going to have to say the terms out loud, which meant a conversation, which meant she was going to walk back into this with her eyes open and her conditions clear and no pretense that any of it was simple. She was okay with that. She had been okay with complicated things for a long time. She had rebuilt a filing system at 4:30 in the morning for 3 weeks because she couldn't leave a broken thing broken. This was just a larger version of that. A more consequential version, with higher stakes and more moving parts, and a man at the center of it who was learning, late, imperfectly, at considerable cost, to leave the door open for something other than control. She could work with imperfect. She was imperfect herself, in ways that were specific and documented, and had become, against all reasonable expectation, something that an empire had needed. She picked up her phone, typed a message to Tae-hyun. 3 things. She typed them plainly, in order, the way she always did things. Facts first, then the inference, then the question. Except this time there was no question at the end. Just the 3 things, stated as conditions, clear and unembellished. 1. She would be involved in the restructuring of the organization's internal communication and review processes, not as an assistant, not as a title without authority, as an actual participant in decisions. 2. She would have autonomy in that role. She would say what she thought without filtering it for palatability, and he would not make her put the filing system back. 3. Whatever the personal arrangement was, it would be built on the basis of this conversation and not on the basis of 11 days of crisis, which had its own distorting effects that required clear air and normal time to account for properly. She sent it. She sat with her empty teacup and waited. His response came in 2 minutes. Yes? Yes. Agreed, with the condition that normal time begins this weekend because I find myself unwilling to wait longer than that. She read it, read the second sentence again. She typed, "That's not very different from just telling me what to do." 3 seconds. Then, "It is different. I'm telling you what I want. You decide." She sat with that distinction for a moment. It was small. It was also, for him, enormous. She typed, "Saturday." His response was immediate. A single word. "Good." She set the phone down on the kitchen table next to the pager and the folded letter and the empty teacup, and looked at the window and the building across the narrow street and thought about the last 11 days and what they had contained. She thought about the woman who had stood on the platform at Mapo Station with a rain-wilted folder pressed against her ribs, counting ceiling tiles. She thought about the first morning in the penthouse, sitting on the edge of the bed carefully. She thought about the kitchen at 6:15, 2 cups, the second one put on the counter without comment. She thought about the relay station, the smell of salt and metal, the needle on the signal meter swinging to the right and staying there. She thought, I held it, not perfectly. Her arms had shaken. Her plan had been built at 4 in the morning with no sleep and no certainty. Several of its components had been improvised out of 30-year-old equipment and the favor debt between a crime boss and a university classmate. But she had held it. For 12 minutes, with both hands, while the city moved around the harbor, and a man she had called arrogant and ridiculously handsome in a 43-second voice message walked into a warehouse built to be his last room and walked back out again. The weeks that followed had their own shape. They were not easy. She had been honest with herself about that from the beginning, and the weeks confirmed it. The internal review of the organization's processes was slow and resistant, in the way that all deep structural change is slow and resistant, not because people were opposed to it in theory, but because systems built on fear don't dissolve cleanly when the fear is asked to leave. They have load-bearing walls you don't identify until you start removing them. She pushed anyway, carefully, strategically, with the specific patience of a person who had learned that you could not reorganize something in one morning and expect it to stay reorganized. You had to do it in pieces, and you had to bring people with you, and you had to be willing to leave the drawer the way it was until the person who owned the drawer understood why changing it was worth the disruption. Tae-hyun let her push. That was the thing she had not fully believed until it happened repeatedly. He let her push. And when she was right, he adapted. And when he disagreed, he said so directly, and they argued about it with the specific efficiency of two people who had run out of patience for anything indirect. He never made her put the filing system back. Not once. The meetings with the Busan and Incheon families happened in December. She was in the room, not as an assistant, as the person who had compiled the documentation that was being presented, a fact that was acknowledged explicitly at the beginning of the meeting at Tae-hyun's insistence, and that produced a quality of silence from the assembled men that she recognized as the silence of recalibration. They had expected the documentation to have come from somewhere inside the organizational structure. Learning it had come from an administrative assistant who had noticed a rounding error and followed it to its source seemed to require a moment of processing. She let them process it. The meetings went long and went hard and did not resolve everything in a single session because nothing real resolves in a single session. But they resolved the immediate crisis. They confirmed that Min-suk had constructed the conflict deliberately and that no aggression had existed between the organizations that hadn't been manufactured by him. They established the basis for a different arrangement to Des, not simple, not without conditions, but different from the one that had nearly produced a massacre in a harbor warehouse on a Thursday night in November. Min-seok's hearing happened in the 3rd week of December. She was not in that room. She had made her decision about that early. She had contributed what she could contribute, and the internal reckoning of an organization she was not a member of was not hers to witness. Taehyun told her afterward, briefly and without editorializing, that it had been concluded. That proportionate consequence had been applied. She asked one question: did he suffer? Taehyun said, he will have time to think about what he built. She accepted that as the answer it was. The Shin Daewoo signing happened in January. The amended Section 9 clause was in the final document. She was in the room for that one, not as an assistant and not as anything with a formal title yet, because the question of what her title was supposed to be was still working itself out in the deliberate way of things that didn't have a pre-existing category to fall into. She was there because she had been there at the beginning, and because the beginning had required her to be, and because continuity was its own form of acknowledgement. She stood near the window of the signing room with a cup of coffee that was actually hot this time, and watched Senior Counsel Park set the final document on the table, and watched Taehyun sign it with the specific contained satisfaction of a man who had nearly not gotten there and knew it. He looked up when it was done. Across the room. Found her. She gave him a small nod. He gave one back. That was the whole exchange, and it was enough, and it was precisely the right size for a room full of people who didn't need to see anything more than that. Afterward, in the corridor, he stopped beside her. Section 9, he said. Held up, she said. Yes. A pause. You should have been on that document. I don't need to be on the document. I know you don't need to be, he said. That's not what I said. She looked at him. Then put me on the next one, whatever the next one is. The Mirai introduction is February. Then February? He nodded. Then quieter meant only for the corridor they were standing in. Saturday was a beginning. She thought about Saturday. About his penthouse, which she had seen in a different way the second time, not as the room with charcoal furniture and no personality, but as the room of a man who had learned, slowly and imperfectly, to leave some space in it for another person's choices. The conversation they'd had, which was long and sometimes difficult and did not resolve everything in a single session, because nothing real does. The way he'd listened when she talked and argued when he disagreed and did not once, across 6 hours of Saturday, performed the neutral. It was, she said. They walked back toward the signing room where the conversation and the congratulations were happening, and she thought about the 43 seconds that had started all of it. The voice message, the wrong recipient, the audio waveform screenshot from risk management, and the single period from Senior Counsel Park that had communicated a volume of things. She thought about the fact that she had said both true things in that message, the arrogance and the handsome existing simultaneously as things in a person often did, the flaw and the quality wrapped around the same core, inseparable, requiring you to take them together or not at all. She had taken them together. She was still in the process of understanding what that meant, and she thought that was probably appropriate. Understanding a person, a real person, complicated and imperfect and capable of both the empire and the 8 lines of careful handwriting, was not the work of 11 days or a few months. It was the work of time, of the kind of time that required showing up to ordinary Thursdays and not just surviving the extraordinary ones. She was willing to show up to ordinary Thursdays. She had always been good at showing up. That was the thing about her that had never been an accident. No matter how many voice messages she'd sent to the wrong group chat, she showed up, she did the work, she noticed the rounding errors and followed them, and she held the lever for 12 minutes when holding it was what the moment required. That was who she was. It had always been who she was. She just hadn't been in a room before that was large enough to show it. She found that room because of 43 seconds of exhausted honesty. She thought, there are worse ways to change your life. She thought, there are worse men to say the true thing about. She walked back into the signing room and accepted someone's congratulations on work well done and drank the rest of her coffee and let the afternoon continue. Outside, Seoul moved the way it always moved, relentless, indifferent, full of people surviving their own extraordinary Thursdays in their own ordinary ways, the city turning in the cold January light, keeping no record of what had happened and what had changed and what had been, against all reasonable odds, saved.